Hello everyone, Mitz here for another video, and today I'm going to tell you the process that I go through for making a one-shot. This is the general process I go through when trying to make a one-shot completely universal. It's usually what I use when I'm making a one-session one-shot rather than just a one-shot adventure, but it can be expanded out to both. And as with all great one-shots, they're usually trying to fit into any sort of story and any tier of play that they can. Step 6 of this video is likely the most important, so stick around for that. And without further ado, let's get started. Step number 1, deciding a theme. Now, I typically go with 3 different themes for my one-shots because they kind of can be a little bit of a counter to the rest of the campaign that you're in, and usually using one-shots to break up the monotony of a campaign, or if it's something that you haven't played in a while and you're trying out a different style of DMing or a different style of storytelling. So I typically break this up into 3 different sections. A mystery with a who or what, and the players are trying to solve some kind of interesting event. An adventure where they are traveling, moving around and following different things and using a lot of skill checks. Or the third one is fighting evil. So this is usually combat encounters and a lot of different variations of encounter type designs. Now, I know I just said you can kind of pick one of these to sort of go the opposite of what your entire campaign's about so that you can get a bit of a break from the seriousness or silliness perhaps of your campaign. These can also be paired really well to go along with your campaign if you can't figure out something that you want to do for the main storyline and you're trying to kind of, I guess, stall for time. You can interject one of these little one-shots in to kind of throw the players off. Or if they're in an area that you haven't completely designed yet, you can also think of something like this as a way to sort of establish some kind of story within that small zone that they're in. Which leads me into step number 2, which is creating a plot hook. So you can create a very simple plot hook and then just extrapolate that to a story. It's not always easy to do, but it does take a little bit of practice. You want to design your plot points and just keep it simple. In a game like D&D, it's better to keep it simple because your plot points are driven by your players more than they are driven by the story itself. Sometimes you can use NPCs to push certain parts of the story forward, but you don't want to take away player agency when doing this, so make sure you keep it simple enough so that if things have to change dynamically depending on what your players do, it's easy enough to change it up on the fly. I'll give you a quick example of what I mean by extrapolate with a short plot hook. Let's keep it simple here and say it's an adventure style theme for this one-shot campaign, and the plot hook is someone needs to go and rescue the traveling merchant who was due in town a day ago and has probably been attacked by those damn pesky goblins one more time. The plot hook is there for the players to go out and rescue the traveling merchant. They know the traveling merchant is probably wealthy and will reward them handsomely. Also, maybe the traveling merchant had an item at that point in time that the party was specifically after, and he was the one that they had to go and buy it from. The MacGuffin of sorts they were already tasked to get from another adventure that they're on. Or perhaps they get there and they find that the goblins have stolen some magic items that have somehow gone haywire, and now the goblins have these items that they can't control and things are getting out of control. They're taking them into the town, and then instead of trying to just simply, steal some small knickknacks, they accidentally cast a fireball and blow up half the city. This is the basis loosely for a one-shot I have created on the Dungeon Masters Guild. It's called Goblins Gone Wild. There is a link down below in the description, so you can go and check that out. It is very fun, and I did it recently with a group of friends of mine, and the Wild Magic Third table just... Look, we got like 4 goblins turned into pot plants, alright? It was great. But that's a way to extrapolate a simple plot hook into a sort of arcing story that the players can react to and jump right into. And if you notice, it's very open-ended. It doesn't really have a specific endpoint. The players could go and get the items back, they could confront the goblins, they could combat the goblins, they could scare the goblins, they could find another way to kind of help the merchant at least, or maybe the merchant can help them and he knows how to get the items back. So there's no real ending point for it, which gives your players even more agency over what's going to happen next. And the agency leads me into step number 3, which is choosing which pillars of play you want to focus on for this one session, one shot. You've got combat, roleplay, and travel. If you want your one session, one shot to be mostly about combat and in a specific encounter that you have in mind, Combat is the one we're going to lean on, and we're going to lean in heavily into designing the encounter and making the encounter extremely interesting and fun. If you're into the second pillar of play and you're more into a role play, this is kind of a little bit more synonymous with the mystery who or what style adventure. Then you're probably going to want to come up with some interesting skill challenges and some intrigue to add into the plot that the players can kind of slowly figure out, and if they're taking a little bit too long, make the hints a little bit more obvious. And then the third pillar of play is all about travel, and travel isn't necessarily traveling a huge distance, but a lot of the time you can think of it as another way to kind of give a time frame or urgency to how this sort of adventure is meant to feel like it's being played out. Is it they have a relaxed amount of time and they can take a couple of weeks and they're traveling over long distances, or is it they have to go, they have to find the MacGuffin, they have to find the missing person, they have to figure out what's going wrong, because if they don't, something tragic will happen in the meantime. So that's how you use those three pillars of play in your one session, one shot. I would suggest trying to touch them all slightly, but again, travel can be used mostly as like a sense of urgency to give the idea that this is just a one session, one shot, so you want to get it done quickly. And also combat usually plays a large part in a lot of my one session, one shots, and that's only because I really love encounter design. Using RP, you can kind of use that to bridge the gaps between the information the players don't know and the amount of information they need to know before they get to where they need to go and before they fight what they need to fight. Step number 4 is creating NPCs to smooth over these situations. And like I just said, you want your NPCs to know specific things so that they can tell the party those things and no more. Maybe. Depends how stuck your players get. But during this section, you really want to know a few things. What do the PCs need to learn? Why would a specific NPC know that thing that they need to learn? And what other NPCs exist that can help them if they really can't figure it out? Once you've got these NPCs in place, you probably won't need many more. Yeah, you can throw in some guards here and there or some innocent bystanders, and if you get unlucky and give them an interesting name or make them look really silly, then yeah, your players are probably going to interact with them a hell of a lot and love them and never leave them alone, even though they were literally something you came up with on the spot. But the trick here is, if your interesting NPCs are not the ones that know things, they do now. You make your interesting NPCs, or the ones that players hang on to, the ones that know the information, and the ones that they were supposed to get the information of, just kind of shuffle them off to the side and don't even worry about them. This is something I've said a lot before in other videos, but the important NPCs in your story are the ones your players want to interact with. Okay, step number 5 is maps, and if you need any. So if you're doing a lot of travel, maybe a region or a town map or some kind of like world map might be necessary, but don't put too much effort into it. Especially since this is only going to last one session, then you don't really going to need to know the names of the regions around the region that you're in. You only really need to know the names of the couple of towns you might be traveling between. If you need a town map to simply show how big the town is or where specific buildings are in the town, if that relates to your adventure in some way, then sure, go ahead and make a map. If not, simply describe it to your players and have a quick handy note that they can take down so that they know relative to, you know, the town square, the merchant is on the northern side of the town, and the log worker is on the southern side of town, and the farms are on the western side of town. That's simple enough for them to get the idea of where things are, and if they need to, give them a blank piece of paper and they can all make a map for themselves. The real 2 things that you're going to need for this map section of your one shot is a random battle map in case they run into something or they do something unexpected, and you can quickly whip something up where you can give them a quick layout of the scenario or situation that they're in, or if you have a planned encounter that you think they'll likely run into, which is a lot of the time what you kind of schedule for in one shots, then you're going to want your specific battle map. And go to town on this battle map if you want the combat to be extremely interesting and you want to use the environment a lot in the combat, which I suggest doing because that's always a lot more fun than just slap fest back and forward, is to interact with the environment in some way to make it more interesting. Then put details in the map and let the players know that this map is specifically for this encounter and it's not just something you've riffed off of Google Images, so that they actually know that things on the map itself are actually important. So if you can see it, think about it. Think, why is that there? Or ask, why is that there? give them that information from the start of the encounter so they'll have more to work with. Speaking of more to work with, I have a Patreon, and you guys can go there and get a bunch of free stuff if you sign up as a free member. There's maps, monsters, and magic items every single month. I also have a blog post that I put up at the start of each month that gives you more tips on how to be a more fun and better dungeon master. Just like this video, I guess. And also, I do have stuff on the DMs Guild, like I mentioned earlier. You can go and check that down in the links below. Don't forget, please like and subscribe. You have no idea how much it helps me to see more people subscribing to the channel and liking the videos. It gives me more enthusiasm, gives me more confidence, and it just boosts my motivation to keep making interesting and fun Dungeons & Dragons videos. Alright, speaking of, let's get back to it. Okay, I mentioned at the start of the video, but this is step number 6, and number 6 is probably one of the most important things when it comes to making a one-shot is scalability. How do you scale this adventure to your party level, or to your tier of play, I suppose? First, you want to kind of like have the idea of the tier of play that your players might be doing if you're creating a one-shot for a specific group of people. Go ahead and jump on something like Kobold Fight Club for a simple idea of what kind of enemies and what kind of challenge ratings of enemies you might be wanting to use for your encounters in that one-shot. And then my biggest trick, I suppose, I would say that I use a lot is Lazy Dungeon Master's Guide by Sly Flourish. Have a look at that stuff. Gives you a great idea really quickly about what you could throw at your party. I do tend to use Kobold Fight Club a lot more because it gives me the ability to swap in and swap out monsters that I enjoy using a lot. But there is this kind of idea that I have kind of, I want to give it a phrase, but the best thing I can think of is like scaling the perceived difficulty of an encounter. So you never really want your players to know just exactly how difficult an encounter is when you first start it or when you go into it. But they should figure out quite quickly in the first 1 or 2 rounds of combat how difficult this encounter is going to be. And the 2 ways that you show your players this is when they deal damage, does the damage seem significant? And when they take damage, is that damage a lot for their health pool? There's 2 kind of ways of doing the whole scaling process, right? The first one is know what level your players are going to be, and then scale the monsters accordingly, using either the Sly Flourishes method or using either Kobold Fight Club to just adjust which creatures you have in the combat. If you don't want to change the creatures, you can just kind of change the attributes slightly to reflect it. Or the second method that I tend to use is your monsters do a percentage of the player character's health. You don't tell them it does 20% of your health, right? You look at their health on the character sheet or mark down their health totals on the character sheet, and you tell them how much damage it does every time it hits. So if you're starting from an easy encounter, you want the monsters to die in 2 to 3 rounds of combat. So no matter how much damage the players really do, unless it's like a critical hit, or they use a big spell that's supposed to do a lot of damage, then you want to kind of scale that accordingly. So say you have a kobold that has 10 HP, and your players on an average short sword hit are doing 5 damage, right? Now you know that this kobold is only supposed to take 2 hits before it dies, but there's 6 kobolds versus 4 players. So realistically, it's going to take, if they hit both times on their consecutive turns, or if they focus fire 1 kobold, they might be able to get half the kobolds down in 1 round, maybe 2 rounds of combat, right? Now this is supposed to be a very easy encounter, so you could just make kobolds fall over after 1 hit. Or you could pump up the difficulty by making it last 4 rounds of combat, so that double the amount of health the kobolds have. Not necessarily even doubling the amount of health the kobolds have, but you could double just a couple of the kobolds' health, make them look a little bit bigger, look a little bit meaner, carry a bit of a heavier sword, and then make those 2 the kind of boss kobolds. And then you could also have the amount of damage that the kobolds deal be more significant as well. So those are the 2 kind of ways to scale it. You either buff health pools, or buff specific health pools, or buff damage that they do to make it seem more legitimately scary. This is a very difficult task to do if you're a newer DM, but if you're an older DM, you probably have a pretty good idea already of how to scale these kinds of encounters to make them easy, medium, and hard. And step number 7 is pull it all together. You want to make a start, a middle, and an end for your entire one-shot. The start will be the plot hook, the middle will be the encounter or the kind of complication that they have when it comes to trying to solve the problem that they're overcoming, and then the end will be the resolution and the moving on to of the next adventure or a plot twist. I would also suggest, while you're tying everything together, to rewrite certain information that you need to know again and again and again at each point in the story, at each plot point in the story that you have kind of mapped out. If you need to know that one of the goblins has a limp because he's been attacked by something, then write that down at the start. So you know when you first introduce him, you remember to tell the players he has a limp. Later on, when they see him again, or when they find out the reason why he had a limp, maybe, you make them remember that goblin that has a limp, right? So you want to like reiterate these small little clues along the way that make the world seem more connected, and this will kind of contribute a lot to your verisimilitude, right? So your kind of feeling of immersion. Do these things frequently, but don't do them so frequently that they kind of become a meme within the group, but do them frequently so that the players recognize all these things are tied together in some way. And my last sort of suggestion for this, wrapping it all together, is just don't write too much. Don't make it too complicated. Remember to keep it simple, because your players are the ones that are going to drive parts of the story forward, and your NPCs are going to be the ones that give them the necessary information to do so. So you don't have to plan out all the little steps in between. They will just come up with things themselves, and you are the one that provides the problem. They are the ones that provide the solution. I just want to iterate again, it is super easy to over prep for something like this. Quite often when you're first starting out writing one session one shots, you will create an adventure that will last 4 to 5 sessions worth of stuff. When you're thinking as a new DM, I don't have enough. I have a couple of friends right now that are fairly new to DMing. They've been doing it for, a couple of months, and both times, both of them have tried to run a one shot. It quite frequently feels like we've been playing 4.5 hours and it doesn't feel like we're even close to being finished, and that has happened the first couple of times, but the second couple of one shots they've run have become a little bit more linear, which is fantastic. I love it. They've become more interesting, and they have really kind of scaled it back to know that they're going to fit these things within a 4.5 hour session of playing Dungeons and Dragons. So that's a shout out to my friends Yordle and Soxy. They know who they are, and they're getting better and better, and I'm really happy to see them become better and better DMs. So that's it. Get out there and make more one-shots, guys. Please comment below if you have any cool ideas for one-shots, or if you think I missed anything out of this one-shot creation process, or if you just want to say hi. Also, let me know your ideas for one-shots if you have something that you want to share with somebody, but you're often like me and you can't really share your DM ideas with any of your friends because they're all your players and you don't want to give anything away. I will be taking a couple of weeks break from YouTube for the next few weeks, mostly because I am on my summer vacation at the tail end of it, and I really want to take an actual break from doing anything, as well as new World of Warcraft expansion is coming out in a couple of days, and I am hitting that hard. So nice roleplay gaming strategies, and I will see you guys in a couple of weeks. Don't forget, you can follow along on the Patreon where more stuff will come out in the meantime. All right, peace.